terrible idea. But do you know what's a good idea? The Bible Recap Podcast. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us again. That's Tyler, Queen Dawn, and I'm Pastor Josh. And we are at week 21, where we are finishing both First Chronicles and Second Samuel. And so if you're keeping up, just note again in the description box is the list of scripture readings. Again, we finished Second Samuel, First Chronicles, and of course the regular assortment of the Psalms. Yes. I guess we forgot to check who was starting us off again this week.
I started last week.
So it's Don's turn.
Okay.
So number one, hit it.
All right. David makes some shocking claims about his righteousness in his song in 2 Samuel 22, 21 through 25. What do you think he's trying to accomplish? Is he trying to keep up appearances in front of the people? Does he think God has forgotten? Or is he pointing to something else altogether?
When I was reading it, I was thinking like he was saying he would be nothing without God. Like God gave him everything, is what I got from it. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. After last week, I second guessed that I even read the right one. So.
I kind of answered just maybe appearances, but I don't really think that's what was in his heart. I think he was trying to show his people how they will be taken care of if they follow God. And so he was making a point of...
Yeah.
I don't think he was trying to state that God had forgotten or any of that. I think he was just maybe making a... I don't know. What's your thought, Mr. Josh?
Well, when I was reading it, I thought it was very interesting the fact that when he says, I've been mindful of all his rules. I have not been guilty.
Okay.
And so it's like, dude, we just read a couple weeks ago how you messed up big time. But I think there is an underlying purpose to it because... especially when we see in his Psalm 51, he talks about blot out my transgressions. So in essence, when David asks for forgiveness, he's asking for his record to be wiped clean. Mm-hmm. Just like for us as Christians, Christ's blood on the cross washes away our sins. And so I think David is talking about because of God, he has a clean slate, pointing to that because of God, that has been made possible. So I think... if you really were to press down David with a one-on-one conversation, it's like, you said it's like yes. He would probably be like, yes, I messed up over and over and over, but because of who God is and because of his forgiveness, his mercy, my slate is clean. Yep. So
sounds good.
That's all I got.
His was more detailed. I think we're on the same.
Yeah. Hey, I answered the question.
Oh my goodness!
The heat has gotten to us.
I suppose number two now, huh?
Yeah.
We're gonna fly through these today. Yeah.
There's a couple I haven't answered. So.
Oh. Well, we were talking about right before is how the heat's is kind of just taking the energy out of all of us.
Yes.
So, but anyways, number two, read Psalm 97 verse 10 and Psalm 99 verse 8 aloud.
Get those out.
Yep.
How do these two verses illustrate the same ideas? Do these ideas feel at odds to you, or do they feel like they complement each other?
All right, 97:10. Let those who love the Lord hate evil, for he guards the lives of his faithful ones and delivers them from the hand of the wicked. All right, and then 99:8. Lord our God, you answered them, and you were to Israel a forgiving God, though you punished their misdeeds. And I put that it was a complement of each other, and mostly just because of what the last little part of 97:10, where it goes, and he delivers them from the hands of the wicked. So, and then So he answered them, and he is a forgiving God. Like, by forgiving them, he has given them the chance. What did I just hold on? By forgiving them, he has brought them closer to God than taking them away from the wicked hands, is where I was going with that. So.
Of course, God hates evil and protects the good, but he frees you from that evil by believing in him. And he forgives. Yeah. So I think, I said it complements. Mm-hmm. I suppose that in some sense it's a little bit at odds, but then the whole Old Testament is at odds. You read one thing and, he's forgiving, and then the next thing we're
being
killing.
Punished.
So, punishing. But I do think they complement each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think they very much do complement each other. Because one of the things that sometimes when we over-focus on one of God's characteristics, or even just on an abstract concept, when we talk about love and forgiveness, sometimes what gets left out is God's justice. And so I'm going really deep here with this one. But here we see God's concept of justice also in alignment with his mercy. This is something we've talked about with Job, at the beginning of the study. But for me, the complement here is that that the rescuing, the saving, is not at the expense of God's justice. Of course, it's going to look different as we look at the ultimate cost of Christ on the cross for the problem of sin, where the ultimate justice that forgives all sins, so that we all have the opportunity to be forgiven. And so, getting back to the psalm here, because that's really going forward as far as what this specific question is asking. I think it's coming to the point to understand that God does work on the behalf of his people. He does offer forgiveness, but there are also consequences. And of course, again, we've talked about before, the natural consequences of sin, but also the ultimate consequence of condemnation. Yeah. And so I think there's a little bit we could read in here between the lines. But for me, it's also, it keeps me mindful of the concept of justice. Mm-hmm. Because if there was no justice, because some people say, well, if God wanted to forgive everybody, why don't you just forgive everybody? Then God could be accused of being unjust. Because what about that person who did this? And you can list a whole list of offenses. You're like, well, this got off scot-free? Yeah. Where's the justice in that would become a question. So I think, and that's where for me I see the connection of justice between the passages.
Yeah.
Like I said, I went really deep with that.
Yeah. Hey, it works. All right. Question 3. Scripture tells us that both God and Satan incited David to take the census. 2 Samuel chapter 24, verse 1, and 1 Chronicles chapter 21, verse 1. How could these two passages work together? And I actually wrote down in day 143, she talks about it in here, about how, let's see, I wrote it down in this one. Paraphrasing it a little bit, but God shows God's using evil for his plan is kind of where she's going for that. Like, God can take evil and turn it into a positive and go down his plan, even with Satan being involved is kind of where I was going with that. So that's kind of how I took it once at reading that, realizing how those two work together, of giving us an example of God taking a bad thing and making good of it.
Yeah.
I don't remember
That's kind of what I said too, that God uses the evil to make good. And he used the evil spirit's motives to bring about his plan for his people, which bringing Solomon as a son. I mean, that was something good that came out of.
Yeah, something evil.
Yeah. And I think you'd be careful to say that God isn't causing the evil, but because David ultimately had the choice. And I like how both in the Second Samuel and First Chronicles, Joab records Joab's, apprehensions. Like, are you sure you want to do this? Really?
Yeah.
Right.
Really?
Question.
Really? And of course, he says David was, he was determined to do this, and so I think that's one of those things where, as Christians, sometimes we forget that even in one of Paul's letters, I think it's one of the Corinthians letters, he says that, God searches the minds and tests the hearts of men. Will we choose the free will to follow his word, to follow his law? Especially, David brags about it.
Yeah.
And of course, this is another example right here. Is like, but, and that's where I think she uses the word insight. I guess that's what kind of throws me off as when you think about, particular word usage. But the contrast in Chronicles and Second Samuel, whether it's God or Satan, because we could also bring in here in the Old Testament understanding of the divine counsel, that the fact even recorded in Job that Satan shows up and is like, "Hey, can I do this?" And God says, "Well, see how righteous Job is." And of course, David kind of fails in this moment, but if Satan is the active person, who actively incites David, we do know that sometimes God, again, searches the minds and tests the hearts. Not that he wants us to do bad, not that he wants us to sin, but it's a revealing of our own character. Even as tough as it is for some folks to digest at times, that though we are not tempted by God, God will allow us, because we've chosen to walk into that temptation, to let us go through the consequences of that choice. And then, of course, things unravel for David. Yeah. For David, is like, do you want this consequence, or this consequence?
Yeah. Yeah, there's some good ones.
So, and that's what made me think about the Paul's words. God searches the minds and tests the hearts of men. That sometimes there's the fork in the road that that God may bring us to. That, of course, there's the right one. That's the wrong one, but the choice is ultimately up to us.
Mm-hmm.
4.
Yep.
Number 4.
For the king to take a census when God commands it is obedience, but for the king to take a census when God doesn't command it is sinful. What are some areas of life where you want to take the liberty to take your own census after he has set up boundaries?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah. I kind of just went to more of, like, I didn't have an example necessarily. I could kind of think of one. But it's kind of like the old saying, like, take action into your own hands. Like, when we kind of just step too far outside and not put our trust in God, we, go ahead and just, all right, I'm going to take care of this one. Is kind of what I was getting for when he did this. Like, I'm just going to, count my guys, make sure I got enough just in case God doesn't follow through with what he says. Mm-hmm. And, but yeah, I don't know. This was I had a lot more issues coming up with answers to some of these, because it was, I don't know, just a little harder than usual, I think.
This one wasn't tough for me, just for the fact of my age and close to retirement.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, both Johnny and I are just like, you got to work more so you have more, because we don't know how much more it's going to take.
Yeah.
And I know it's an issue for me that I need to be able to, he's going to take care of me if I trust.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it's hard to do that. So money and possessions was probably my census where
Yeah.
I have a hard time letting go of that.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's typically the biggest one for us as a culture. Because, I mean, especially in this last year where inflation has just been crazy. I mean, gas prices just jumped another 20, 30 cents in the last week.
Yeah.
I mean, just 2 weeks ago, I filled up at Sandskill for like $3.06, and I filled up yesterday for $3.39. I'm like, hello.
It's 352 today.
Oh, my
Good
goodness.
grief.
Anyways, because one of the things that the notes here shared, and I can't remember if she noted in the book, 'cause sometimes I blur those too, is that when kings took census of their country, usually trying to figure out how many soldiers they have, how many able bodies, and of course, what's recorded for us after the census is, what's the military strength of Israel, and so I think for us the temptation for a question where we take our own census is the keeping up with the Joneses, grass is greener on the other side of the fence type of things, to where we do want to be prudent, count the cost, use some of Jesus' language, but is it for his glory or for ours? Is there trust or is there distrust, or apprehension? I mean, whatever word you would like to use for that. And I think money is just the easiest one. I mean, it kind of is for me as well, because still paying off student loans.
Yeah.
They're very, very expensive. It's like, how many more years until we can relax a little bit?
Yes.
Did I just say my comment? You don't relax, John. They need more. We got to trust. More.
Yes.
Oh, man. All right, number 5. Assuming the angel of the Lord is the pre-incarnate Jesus, is it challenging to think of him fulfilling the Father's assignment in 1 Chronicles 21:14-16? Why or why not?
I did not know how to answer this one.
I put no, because it's kind of, in my opinion, foreshadowing what sacrifice Jesus is going to make for us. So especially when God's told him to stop, and it was almost like saying, to me anyways, like God was almost telling Jesus, like, this is where you're gonna, your sacrifice here is going to save these people, where we don't need to demolish them. Like, you're going to save them. Like, I guess it really isn't foreshadowing, but like God came to the realization almost like, I could send my son. Like, he always knew he was going, like, my son can save these people. So, but then, like, pretty much that Jesus will be the sacrifice to end all and to save us. So
I kind of like that answer. What's your thoughts?
Well, I guess for me, I don't want to presume a straight theophany where it's God himself present if there's not a good indication. So sometimes, when the scripture says the angel of the Lord, it is referring to God being present. I mean, but we really don't have a good indication, and I would need to, I guess, do a little bit deeper research on word study on what is the Hebrew word here being used for angel. So is it? So I guess what I'm balking at, is it the pre-incarnate Jesus? I don't know. Possibly, but I'm not. That's not a hill I'm going to die on. It could just be an angel who's there to clean house. But also, I'm not opposed to it, and it doesn't create a challenge for me, because in Revelation, Jesus comes at the time of judgment and cleans house. Revelation describes sword coming out of his mouth, and and laying waste those who refuse to believe in the wicked and whatnot. And so that's kind of where I was torn a little bit on this question. Is like, I don't know if I want to say it's the pre-incarnate Jesus, though it could be. So that's probably not it's not as satisfying answer, but
I liked his answer.
it was a good answer. Yeah.
But
that's where, for me, I probably overthought it a little bit myself on, pre-incarnate Jesus. Like, could be, but there's a lot of angels out there too.
Yeah.
It could have been Michael.
Yeah.
yeah.
It could have been Billy Bob. I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, my.
I'm sorry, folks. It's this heat. It's this blasting
It is
heat.
heat. It's the heat. Get that straight.
So no, but it's comforting. It's just,
Yeah.
who it is exactly doesn't bother me. Mm-hmm. Number 6, the long question here.
Yay.
The Levites are assigned their roles in the temple not on the basis of their passions or giftings, but based on genealogies. For much of history, this has been the case, for people to follow in the career paths set by their ancestors. Only in recent years have we become more individualized. It's easy for us to see how God can work in our individual stories, since that's our cultural perspective. But how can you see God at work in the story of these families' occupations? How are his character and plan revealed through that process?
I didn't have a good answer for
Me
this
either.
one.
Sorry. It's up to you again, Josh.
No, you guys
Sorry.
take a shot at it, Your Highness.
I don't. The only thing that kept coming to my mind, anyways, is I got to know when I was working in Emporia, the bank we had quite a few hotels as account holders, and several of them were owned by Indian immigrants, and almost all of them had the last name Patel. Well, in India, Patel means innkeeper, and that's why majority of Patels own hotels, because it's very similar to what they're saying here. Like it's, and I easily could be wrong. I'm just going off what I've been told. Forewarning.
Way to cover.
Yes. I'm wrong. Yeah, I'm wrong quite often, so don't mind me. But it's almost like a pride to him that I think he went back to like great grandfather owned an inn. Mm-hmm. He owns one now in a free America where he can, without anyone over him. Like he makes his decisions, where as before he kind of, which is a very cool story. And I almost feel like it's in their blood to take care of God's place. Mm-hmm. That's with the Levites taking care of it for so long, that once we got to the temple, it just made sense for them to continue to. But I don't understand the character part of that. I don't. Yeah, that's about the end of what I have.
I got nothing. My head is spinning because you think of, if you've come from a farming family, there's that character. That you're good stewards of the land, that type of thing, and that kind of draws down. But I don't know if that's where this was going or not, because I really couldn't.
Yeah. But there also, I guess, it could show pride too. I know, like when you said farming, like my brother-in-law just came back to start farming because he wants the pride of continuing a legacy. But pride can also be your downfall as well. But I don't know. It was just a thought that kicked in that really never finished. Sorry.
Well, if you think about it, in the ancient world, it was guaranteed work. Where in our individualized culture, you go out on your own and you take a swing to see if you can make it. So in a sense, there's actually more risk in our individualized approach than there is taking over the family business, because it's established. It's there. It's always been there. It's going to be there as long as you don't screw it up, basically. So that's just the cultural perspective. But also, one of the things that, and this is kind of an argument from silence, so this is kind of a fallacy to presume this, but it's a question like, well, what if the families in particular, even though they're assigned as families, maybe they are, as families, gifted in those particular areas? Can't argue that, but it's a question I had that, they just might be, those who are playing the horns, they just might be naturally musical. Because I don't know if you ever did band in school.
Nope. The
very first day, I know for me, is that you had to blow on all the different mouthpieces to see which one worked.
Which one would work for you.
Yeah. And so there might have been families who just naturally had the ear and the ability to do that. And so I think for God, how it reveals his character, when families are assigned a particular role, no one's left out. There's always going to be a job. You're always going to have a job, and there's always going to be a job in the future for your kids, your grandkids. No one has to guess or take a bigger risk in life than they have to, especially when there's, I think in a sense more uncertainty in the ancient world as far as length of time for your life, and the fact that there weren't as the options for individual business as there is today. I mean, there's a whole world of jobs that I had no clue in high school, and so I think again, as part of God's character, he's taking care of his people, because the Levites again didn't have territory. They had some settlements scattered throughout, and if you're supposed to be arranged by clan, but your tribe, I mean, your tribe is the one that's scattered throughout, and you don't have a central location. This arrangement then guarantees that you have a job, you have an income, you have a place, you are part of the community, even if you're in Judah or Benjamin or Ephraim or Manasseh or wherever. So that's what I saw.
What he said.
I like that. I like that.
All right. Number 7. Read Psalms 138, verse 8 aloud. Where do you like to put the emphasis in this verse? Why is that particular emphasis so most meaningful to you? I had written down, do not abandon the works of your hands. And the reason why is we are all works of his hands. If we ask him not to abandon his works, that's us. Always stay with us and hopefully push us in the plan he wants. So, yeah.
Very cool. Very cool.
My particular emphasis was on him. Everything was you. Lord, you do everything. Lord, you love. Your love continues. You made us. You do not leave us. But then that's my everyday Bible.
No.
So, that was my emphasis. It was all about him because he does all these things.
For me, the part I focused on was the steadfast love, because it kind of connected the line before it and the line after. So the line before, the Lord will settle accounts for me. I think of Ethan's message, let God fight your battles for you.
Yeah.
At the end, God's going to take care of it. Why? Because of his steadfast love, which is eternal. And so in the next, he's not going to then forsake the work of his hands. He's not going to forsake us. He's not going to forsake, our participation in his mission and plan for the salvation of the world.
Yeah. I liked that question, though. That one.
That was a good
I
one.
would rather have a lot more questions like that. Than, I don't know, sometimes I feel like we're getting in the weeds sometimes with some of these questions. They're hard.
All right, number 8. Read Psalm 139:16 aloud. Does it feel comforting or threatening to think of God having all your days written before you've even existed? And why? And of course, mine 139:16 says, "You saw my body as it was formed. All the days planned for me were written in your book before I was 1 day old."
I think it's comforting, and that I hope I follow the plan that helps our people the most. I don't know. This was but it's also been something I've always believed, I guess. Good old Catholic school taught us we had free will, but God knows what decisions you're going to make from the very beginning. So I guess that's just comforting that the scripture is matching up to what I've been taught. Mm-hmm. So.
It's comforting, the fact that nothing goes unnoticed by God. Mm-hmm. It's even in the gospel. God knows when when a sparrow falls, or I think it's in the Gospels. So, and this is one of those where I think it's careful not to presume that God orchestrates everything like a puppet. Our free will understanding, because the knowledge, but also the control, are two different things. Considering that for God, 1,000 years is like a day, and a day is like 1,000 years. Anyways, it's very comforting that nothing is going to surprise God, and then the fact that helps me in my faith and my confidence. So when things don't go according to my plan, it's something that He has a plan, and it's not going to escape His notice. And it's also helped me in my I want to use the word confidence, in this sake that not to be surprised when the world acts like the world. Mm-hmm. Don't be surprised when human beings act like human beings. Even though it might be, frustrating, and those sandpaper people.
Yes.
And so, to me, it's a lesson in comfort, which I'm still growing into.
Yeah.
I was threatened. Sorry.
You was threatened?
Yeah. It bothers me a little bit, but it wasn't really explained. I think I overthought it, because I don't like to think that. But the way, let me back up. But the way you just kind of explained it, then I know we do have that free will too that could change the course. And I know He's going to be there when the free will causes harm or damage. But I've just never been one of those that felt like all my days were numbered, or that it was predestined. And so that threatens me a little bit, because then it makes me feel like no matter what I do, I can't change what's going to happen.
But here's the cool thing, is that yes, they're numbered, but are they locked in? Because there are instances in Scripture where Hezekiah, what we're going to read later, where it's like, can I get a little bit more time? And God's like, sure. And so that's where, again, I think we have to be careful in this, understanding the knowledge of God, but also the presumption of predestination, that we can make requests of God that might change something. Because imagine some of the miracles that Jesus performs, where if they would have asked Him, or Jairus' daughter, if he didn't go talk to Jesus, she would have stayed dead. But he asked Jesus, your faith has healed your daughter. And she lives, and probably lives a full life. So, and that's where I think I'm also in awe and wonder of the mystery.
Oh, absolutely. It's it's a mystery, and you're just in awe.
Yeah.
But
Did that soften it for you?
still creeps me out a little bit. Because then that comes back to that control thing. Well, I just want to know then. So what are my days?
Yeah.
That's one
Instead
thing
of taking
I
the
never.
pleasure of just knowing that it doesn't matter, God's with me, and whatever I face, He will be there.
Well, and that's where I wonder that when David uses this description, or it's that's where you know the days. Could it be an idiom just referring to God who has a plan, who knows? Not necessarily that our numbers are, written out or tacked on a wall, and God's just waiting to yank us out of here. And so I think that's where too. I think I would need a little more research to see what kind of language that might refer to something that's not as literal for us to take as we can, because the ancient writers used idioms and phrases that.
But also like the translation, like there's some people that use, I can't think of a phrase, but in other countries, like a certain phrase is something bad, where here it's something good. Like there's that loss in translation as well, of some of those idioms. So where it means something, but the way our words are now, it matches up.
So let me read you my Hebrew Bible.
Okay.
Verse 16. Your eyes saw my unformed limbs. They were all recorded in your book, referring to limbs. In due time they were formed to the very last one of them.
That's more comforting.
So that's where, as I said earlier, I'd like to go actually a little deeper on what's this, because even part of the Hebrew from that verse is not entirely clear. It says here, part of this is uncertain of the translation. So, what is there actually more to discover?
Yeah.
Should be pretty exciting and comforting to Her
Yes.
Majesty.
Thank you.
Let's see, number 9. Solomon is the son of David and Bathsheba, whose relationship is marred by sin upon sin. What does it reveal about God that he chooses Solomon to be Israel's king and his temple builder?
I think I wrote this exact thing not long ago, a couple weeks ago, but that God uses all types for his work, and that we all are worthy of him. So Solomon is kind of clouded in sin, from what David has done to get to be with Bathsheba. But, and I'm sure just like, I'm going to use it for a lot of Christians, having a child out of wedlock, that kind of puts a cloud over that child. And I'm sure Solomon probably felt the same way throughout most of that, because people surely knew. But he, then becomes a king and builds the temple that God resides. So it kind of just shows that no matter who we are, no matter where we are in our lives, God can use us for his plan. So
That's pretty much what I said. I mean, even sin can be redeemed and brought to glorify God. So
Sin can be redeemed, and God chooses whom he will choose. Because we already told David, you're going to have a son named Solomon, and he's going to be the guy.
yeah,
So, yeah, of course, that information beforehand, but as I'm thinking about our study up till this time, God tends to choose the underdog, or the one that that would typically be left out. So if you think about starting with, even just with Abraham, Isaac technically shouldn't have happened, until God intervened. Esau was the oldest and was supposed to get everything. Nope, everything went to Jacob. Oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the order of Jacob's sons. I think Reuben was the oldest, or was it Simeon? Anyways, the tribe that's being elevated is Judah, who's in the middle of the pack. And so now we have, of course, a list of David's sons. Of course, Absalom goes off the rails.
Yeah, just a wee bit.
And part of that could be, too, is that those who were the older sons probably in pride presumed I should be the next king. Mm-hmm. And so in a sense, it was an expectation of selfishness to where God's like, nope, I'm choosing my guy and I'm choosing Solomon. And it was like, why him? His mom is just wicked and this marred with sin, and David, it's like, God's like, no, I get to choose my guy. Mm-hmm. I get to choose my guy. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it.
Yeah.
And of course, we're going to see Solomon. I mean, he's going to start off really well. But of course, he has some of the same challenges as his dad. And Saul did too. But I do thought it was really cool that even though, God told David, no, you're not going to be the one to build a temple. David was like, I'm still getting everything together. All the gold, the silver, the wood is like, son, I can't put it together, but here's a starting point.
Yeah. Here it is. All right. Question 10. Like we have every week, the God shot. So I went with day 144. Psalms 108, verse 12 says, vain is the salvation of man. This is true on so many levels. We can't set our hopes on others. We cannot set our hopes on ourselves. We can't save ourselves. The gospel isn't self-help. We can do nothing to accomplish our salvation, but he saves us. Despite ourselves, verse 13 reminds us that even we do valiantly with God. He is the one at work with God. We shall do valiantly. It is he who will tread down on our foes. He does the doing of our protector, our savior, our priest, and our king. He is where the joy is. Kind of going back to kind of like what Ethan said too. God, he's going to take care of us. He's going to protect us. He's going to save us. We just need to trust and take care of it. So, yeah.
I for some reason, I have the weird image when I think about that passage from Exodus where God's like, move forward. I have the image from Band of Brothers. It's one of the later episodes, and it's Captain Winters, and I think he's a major at this time, but he's standing on the edge, and of course he wants to go in the battle, but he just move forward. Yeah. So I've got that image in my head. Yeah. God's like, what are you doing? Move forward.
Yeah. Just go.
There's my TV movie reference for that. I've been short on those today, but
you have been short on those. My day was 147. God is the source of all things. In 29:12, David says, both riches and honor come from you, and in your hand it is made great. It is to make great and to give strength to all. Verse 14 says, all things come from you, and of your own have we given you. Verse 16 says, O Lord our God, all this abundance that we have provided for building you a house for your holy name comes from your hand, and is all your own. This is true not just of money, but of talents, time, and service. Everything we give back to him originated with him. God is the source of all good things, and he's what they all point to. He is the source, supply, and goal, and he's where the joy is. And I think this kind of hit home for me just on the talents, time, and service, because I see that in our church, and just even kind of back on that one question, where did he know who he was placing, to build or protect or to do whatever in the temple. And I feel like that's what this verse is saying even about all of us too. We do have talents and gifts and service to be given, but whether we recognize it or not. But when we do, when we recognize it and realize that he has given it to us already, it flows a lot easier. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
It works.
Yep.
Yeah.
I smell what you're stepping in.
Thank you.
Pick up what you're putting down.
Oh, goodness. See, I had day 141. Today showed us some unique things about God that we haven't seen elsewhere in our reading, at least not with the kind of poetry David uses here in 2 Samuel 22:36. David says, "Your gentleness made me great." God's gentleness doesn't get a lot of press, but David says it directly corresponds to what has made him fruitful in life. David has been the recipient of God's gentleness, particularly in the way God showed him mercy despite his sins. And David has also displayed God's gentleness. He didn't lord his power or position over others. He spared Saul's life. He cared for Mephibosheth. He pardoned his enemies. This is what meekness looks like. Meekness isn't weakness. It's strength that has been disciplined by humility. And it manifests in David as gentleness. For God himself to display gentleness is remarkable and noteworthy. God is gentle with us, and he's where the joy is. I think for what stood up for me is of course, something I've kind of been hammering in the last couple sermon series is that, as disciples, we want to be who the Savior is. And so we see here in David, he's growing, he's learning, and of course being corrected, but in reflecting God's character to those in his life. And so for me, as I continue to learn and grow, it's to reflect God's character to others. And of course, we all have those good times and those bad times, but that's where I think with David, we can be celebratory in the fact that we have grown, and that in our lives, when we follow faithfully, we can grow a lot.
Yep.
To see the awe and wonder of what God has done.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still a great idea to join us again next week in the
Yes.
Bible Recap Podcast, bringing us back. So this was week 21, and so we get into week 22 next week, where we break into the 1 Kings, 2 Chronicles, and the Song of Solomon. So not for children's ears, some of those passages.
Yeah.
Just half kidding, half serious, because it is as Amy would say, a spicy book.
Yes. She likes to use that often.
So 1 Kings chapters 1-4, and then 2 Chronicles, just chapter 1. And then we got, of course, assortment of Psalms, and then we get into the first 3 chapters of Proverbs, and then Song of Solomon 1-8. And I think, if I remember correctly, that's all of the Song of Solomon. So, of course, that'll all be listed above in the description box.
Yes.
Thank you again for joining us. Hope to see you next week. Take care, and God bless.
Bye.